They told me there'd be cake, so I came. It's strange what gets us to show up, isn't it? A polite promise, a practiced smile, an assumption that maybe this time it'll feel different, that someone will finally look up and see you, not as a presence made of dust and utility, but as a person who once shook the world like her own snow globe. I'm 70 years old, but sometimes I feel ancient, not in body, but in the way people look around me instead of at me. Last Friday, I attended yet another birthday party at my son's house, the kind where the laughter feels like it belongs to everyone but you. Balloons tied up high in the corners, like they were trying to escape the ceiling, and chatter drifting from room to room like someone had left a window open. I sat at the very end of the table, not because I chose it, but because that's where the final empty chair always waits for me. A safe, quiet place, an easy oversight. Plates were passed, drinks were poured, stories were told that didn't need me to be in them. I nodded at jokes I wasn't actually listening to, because that's what I've learned to do, offer facial expressions as placeholders for presence. "Make sure she gets a slice," someone whispered, not to me, about me, as if I were the child in the room. The cake was vanilla, which is what I've always loved, but for the first time in my life I noticed no one ever asked why. They just assumed, which I suppose isn't cruel, just carelessly familiar. I left before the candles stopped smoking. I walked home slowly, listening to the sound of my shoes brushing against the pavement. The streetlights leaned over the road like tired listeners, too bored to ask where I'd been. My house smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The chair by the window, the one I used to rock my son in when he was small, sat in the same place it's always been. I sat in it, just for a moment, and felt the room do nothing around me. That's when it happened. The quiet ache, the sudden awareness that I had become more furniture than family. That night I made tea, not because I was cold, but because I needed to do something with my hands. Something steady, gentle, familiar, but even tea couldn't loosen the knot that had tied itself beneath my ribs. The next morning, I looked in the bathroom mirror and didn't see an old woman. I saw someone who had disappeared by degrees, like a photograph left in the sun too long, someone who, over time, traded voice for peace, traded dreams for being useful. At 10:17 a.m. that day, I made a decision, a small one, but real. I wouldn't wait for anyone to notice me anymore. And I made that decision with a strange calmness, the kind that comes not from bravery, but from finally having nothing left to lose. There's a moment, tiny and ridiculous, when an ordinary object can feel like a key. For me, it was a passport, the kind with a corner bent from being shoved into a drawer and a faded stamp from a holiday 30 years gone. I found it like you find the last piece of a jigsaw you forgot you were finishing, under a pile of unpaid bills, folded into a grocery list with milk circled twice. I hadn't opened it in years. The photo inside was startling. A younger face with a stubborn chin, and hair that wasn't supposed to have silver. I'd been someone once who thought in maps, train lines, ferry timetables, hotel names inked on the inside of a notebook. Somewhere between school plays and PTA meetings and seasons of casseroles, that person had been shelved like a book you plan to read again someday. I sat on the kitchen floor with the passport in my lap and felt something loosen. Not dramatic, no sudden thunderclap, but a slow, sensible unspooling, like the first minute after you untie the laces of shoes that have pinched your feet for a long time. The idea that I could go, and no one would have to approve it, sat in my chest like a small, genuine laugh. I called the travel agency 2 streets over. The voice who answered was young and efficient. "Can I help you?" she asked. There's a politeness that assumes you will explain yourself. I didn't explain. "I'd like a one-way ticket," I said. "Anywhere with salt." There was a short silence, then a cascade of questions, dates, passport number. "Do you want a window seat?" I told her to surprise me. I told her to pick a place where the sea met the light without apologizing. I listened to the typing, the polite little noises of someone arranging the world for a stranger, and then she said, "We have a flight to a coastal town. Small plane, beautiful light, leaves tomorrow." Tomorrow. The words stood up in the room and waited to be spoken again. I bought the ticket. I did not tell my son. I did not tell my daughter-in-law. I left a brief note for my neighbor. Water the plants. Gate key under pot. Because I am not a savage. I am someone who believes in small kindnesses, even when doing a great disobedience. I packed with methodical speed, a navy dress I liked because it made my shoulders sit properly, a cardigan that had survived 3 winters, comfortable shoes, the small notebook with a ribbon around it, a pen that never leaked. I folded things the way I had folded letters once, with attention and a secret satisfaction. There was a peculiar gravity to moving through a house knowing you were removing yourself from its orbit for a while. I touched the banister, the dent in the living room rug made by years of feet, the photo of a man who had been my center for 27 years. I kissed the frame, not as goodbye, but as a thank you for teaching me how to love and for not needing me to be small afterward. I walked out the front door and locked it twice, because habit is a chain, and I am fond of my chains when they are useful. The airport was both foreign and familiar. I had been through it so many times carrying children, mice-like school lunches, or casseroles wrapped in foil, always on someone else's timetable. This time I moved with a strange ease, as if I belonged to my suitcase rather than it belonging to me. The gate agent asked the rehearsed polite thing they do when a senior travels alone. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." I smiled back in the only way I could summon, a small private grin. The plane was noisy and forgiving. The seat beside me remained empty until late, and that gave me a chance to watch the world from a new angle. Clouds have a way of making domestic worries look like paper boats you can let drift. I slept in the kind of light sleep that stitches you together enough to protect you from pain, not so much that you miss the turning of the world. When we landed, the air hit me like an honest thing. It smelled of olives and stone, and even inside the airport, it seemed to be in a better mood than the air back home. My destination was a town that insisted upon color, cobalt shutters, laundry strung like small flags, and a harbor full of restive boats. The pension where I stayed was a building that pretended to be ordinary, but failed. Ordinary never looks like peeling paint framed by bougainvillea. The landlady called me madam with care, as if the word still carried weight if said in the right tone. I unpacked slowly. That first night I wandered without expectation. I bought bread warm from a market stall, and olives so salty I felt the ocean in my teeth. I walked until my legs told me they were done, and then walked a little further, because movement is a good way of telling a story about yourself. I sat on a bench by a canal and watched a couple row by, laughing at something only they knew. My chest tightened for a moment. It was an old ache, not new, familiar as skin. The next morning I did something small and entirely reckless. I put on lipstick, just a touch, the color my mother wore when she wanted to look like she'd been kissed by the sun. It felt like armor and a secret both. I left the pension with no plan, only the intention of noticing. Not sightseeing, not the big boxes of must-see things, but looking for the small people moments that make a place. The woman selling fish who told a joke to a stray cat, the boy repairing a bicycle tire with hands that were sure, the old man who fed crumbs to pigeons and talked to them like they were relatives. The first person who spoke to me unprompted was a woman my age, with silver hair wrapped too quickly into a bun, and eyes that kept missing nothing. She sat at the cafe table beside mine and lifted a spoon with theatrical slowness. "You dropped your glove," she said, tapping the table as if it had been a crime. I looked down. There it was, a glove I hadn't realized I'd lost. She handed it across to me without waiting for thanks. There was no air of pity, only a practical competence, a kindness without the condescension so many people wear like a badge. We began to talk because it felt natural to do so, and because we had both been arranging our lives for others for years, and were discovering aloud that arrangement had left holes. Her name was said once and then left like an aside. I do not like to collect names in foreign towns when I mean to keep people as they are, immediate and unadorned. We walked together that afternoon, not saying much, because when two people of a certain age walk together, they often find the silence is the reliable part. She noticed things I wouldn't, the way a shutter had been painted with a brush that valued care over speed, the dog who slept well because it trusted a particular doorway, the woman who mended nets in a slow, satisfying rhythm. "It's good to be seen," she said suddenly, as if the words had brushed her and then stuck. "Yes," I said, "it's good not to be invisible." She smiled like someone who'd been keeping a private score and had just won one small point. That evening, I sat on a stone step while the sky made itself a different color. I wrote a single line in my notebook. I am not asking permission anymore. It was neither noble nor melodramatic. It was simply truthful. The act of writing it felt like a small construction project, building a bridge from the voice I had repressed to the one I was willing to hear. There are many ways to begin again. Mine began with a passport, a surprise ticket, and a woman who handed me a glove. The rest, as they say, is all the work of noticing the seams of the world and deciding to walk across them. And I made that decision with a strange calmness, the kind that comes not from bravery, but from finally having nothing left to lose. The sun in that town had a way of arriving quietly, like a guest who wandered in early and waited for someone to notice. I woke with it, earlier than I had in years, and the air in my small, whitewashed room felt both foreign and familiar, like a memory I hadn't yet lived. I made tea with the tiny kettle provided by the pension, the kind that rusts faster than it boils water. The old woman who ran the place had left a single tea bag on a saucer, floral and almost too delicate to drink, but I did. Not because I loved the taste, but because I had a sudden affection for gentle things that weren't routine. The glove woman, as I'd come to think of her, appeared that morning in the courtyard, with a map folded too neatly, and a scarf tied like a woman who'd finally let herself choose colors again. She was one of those people who walked as if the ground beneath her was an old friend. We fell into step the way older women often do when they realize that solitude is a choice, not a sentence. "Do you ever feel like other people's decisions built the room you lived in for years?" she asked. It was a strange question at sunrise, but it wasn't strange to me. "Yes," I said, "and I just moved out." She smiled. "Well then, where to next?" There in that sentence was an opening, a chance to expand beyond one small place. I didn't hesitate. "Have you ever been to Florence?" I asked. "No." She paused in a way that revealed a kind of reverence. "But I've always wanted to stand in front of a painting without anyone explaining it to me." That was enough. The next day we boarded a regional train that moved like a relic. Slow, determined, full of corners where past and present sat politely across from each other. I held the ticket in my hand, not because I needed to, but because that paper meant something now. Proof, not just of a journey, but of permission given, not by family, not by time, but by me. The train wound through countryside that looked like it had no interest in modernity. Stone farmhouses, olive groves stitched to the earth, hills gilded by a sun that loved to take its time. My companion, the woman with silver hair, read a French novel with the kind of focus that made her ring finger tap against the page in rhythm. I watched her for a moment, wondered about her past, and then stopped. I had no desire to collect each other's tragedies or victories. We both wore our stories plainly in the relaxed set of our shoulders. That was enough. We arrived in Florence when the church bells decided to command attention from the tourists. The streets stretched in a patchwork of cobblestones and chatter. People spilled out of cafes with the comfortable chaos of lives lived in alleyways older than memory itself. The pension we checked into had brass keys so heavy they could anchor regret. Our room had a balcony that faced red-tiled roofs and laundry lines that sagged under the weight of damp clothes, evidence that life still needed doing, even in the city of poets and painters. "We're too old to climb cathedrals," she muttered when I suggested we explore. "So let's do the second most sacred thing, eat pasta and be unhurried." So we did. We sat under a vine-laced terrace and ate plates of ravioli so fresh they nearly fell apart when we lifted them. A violinist played a few tables away, not for euros or applause, but because he had that impulse woven into his bones. We listened. We breathed. We didn't rush. And I realized that unhurried isn't the absence of movement. It's the presence of being. The next day we went to the Uffizi, because how could we not? I didn't pretend to know art. I didn't need to. When I stood before Botticelli's Birth of Venus, it wasn't the myth that struck me. It was the curve of the shell, the way beauty was born not from a palace or a plan, but something rough and deep and entirely unclaimed. I thought about that for a long time, as tourists snapped photos to prove they'd been near something. Later, outside the gallery, my traveling friend said, "When I die, I want them to put on my stone. She stood in front of a painting and didn't care, that she didn't understand it. She felt it." "I'd want mine to say," I replied, "she didn't disappear all the way." The look she gave me said she understood. We stayed 4 days in Florence. We talked about books we'd never written, recipes we'd perfected but rarely shared, and the kinds of tears that only come in private. I found that I liked the sound of her fork on the plate, her laughter that always arrived 1 second late, her silence that was never heavy. But the trip wasn't about her. It wasn't even about the paintings or the views from bridges. It was about choosing something different, and more importantly, about seeing what came next when you chose it. On the 5th morning, I woke up early again, opened the shutters, and watched pigeons scatter the sky like a handful of restless thoughts. That was when I knew. Florence was not the end. It was never meant to be. The art, the food, the quiet companionship, it had done its work. It hadn't filled me. It had stirred me. There was more of me in the world than I could keep in one place. The glove woman knocked on my door just after breakfast. She carried a newspaper, a small paper bag, and that same quiet curiosity. "Lisbon?" she asked. "Let's go," I answered. We packed quickly, not because we wanted to leave, but because we understood that staying too long in one good place can be as dangerous as never leaving home. Before closing the pension door, I took one last look around. The brass key, the bedspread that smelled faintly of lavender and old soap, the window that framed morning like a blessing, all of it had held me gently, but all of it was now part of a past I was eager not to stay loyal to. I left the room with my bag in one hand and a single resolution in the other. I wasn't going home until the world had sat with me, fully, honestly, and without expectation. "It's good to be seen," she said suddenly, as if the words had brushed her and then stuck. "Yes," I said, "it's good not to be invisible." She smiled like someone who'd been keeping a private score and had just won one small point. That evening, I sat on a stone step while the sky made itself a different color. I wrote a single line in my notebook. I am not asking permission anymore. It was neither noble nor melodramatic. It was simply truthful. The act of writing it felt like a small construction project, building a bridge from the voice I had repressed to the one I was willing to hear. There are many ways to begin again. Mine began with a passport, a surprise ticket, and a woman who handed me a glove. The rest, as they say, is all the work of noticing the seams of the world and deciding to walk across them. And I made that decision with a strange calmness. Portugal greeted me like a woman who'd been expecting me for years. Patient, unbothered, warm in that complicated way old cities are, where every crack in the wall has heard a story it will never repeat. We arrived in Lisbon just after sunset, when the light had turned golden and the hills had begun to glow as if the houses were lit from inside the stone. The city wasn't quiet. It was calm. There's a difference. Calm is alive. Calm is comfortable with itself, like an old friend who doesn't need to ask you how you've been because the answer lives in your eyes. Our guest house was draped in blue azulejos, ceramic tiles painted like stories made to last longer than our bodies. The woman behind the desk called me Senora with a courtesy untouched by irony, and I let the words settle on me like silk. The room was small but full of light. 2 beds, 1 window, 1 view of a square where children rolled a ball lazily across warm stone, their shouts echoing like reminders that joy doesn't care how old your knees are. That first night, I watched them from the balcony, my suitcase still zipped. I didn't feel restless anymore. I felt like something was being received. I couldn't name it, but I trusted it. The next morning, my travel companion stayed behind, something about her knees and a novel she wasn't ready to put down yet, so I wandered alone. The city rose and fell with every step, narrow streets bending like the lives they'd held, corners turning into cafes where old men played cards like it was chess and young lovers shared pastries like secrets. I took the tram, not because it was practical, but because people had told me it was beautiful and I wanted to judge for myself. They were right. The rattling wood, the sway, the way the city revealed itself in flickers between tourists with cameras and locals with groceries, it was like being inside the lungs of something living. At a small cafe near Miraduro de Santa Catarina, I ordered a pastel de nata, the famous custard tart, and a small coffee. I ate the pastry slowly, as if the taste was something to memorize. A young waiter approached. He asked if I liked it. I told him it tasted like a dessert that had forgiven the world. He smiled and leaned in a little. "Did you travel alone?" I paused. "Yes," I said truthfully. He didn't give me pity, didn't give me permission, just gave a nod with the respect daylight gives to good stone. And that's when I noticed, not once since I'd arrived, had anyone reminded me of my age or treated it like an achievement. Here I wasn't an inspiration or so brave. I was simply another pair of feet on the stones. That afternoon, back at the guest house, my companion asked where I'd been. "Eating sunlight and sugar," I answered. She closed her book. "Good," she said. "It looks like it agreed with you." That night, we found a small bar with no sign outside, and a man inside who sang fado, Portugal's music of longing. He sang as if the sorrow wasn't something to push away, but something to make room for at the table. I didn't cry, but I understood every note, even though I didn't know the language. Pain translated itself. Desire translated itself. Age was irrelevant. The song's truth didn't care about my history, only my presence. We walked back through the warm night, our arms swinging in rhythm, the city still buzzing softly behind us. "You feel different," she said. "I am," I told her, "not new. Just more." She nodded. "Ah, welcome back to yourself. There's a moment when you realize that you're no longer walking to escape something. You're walking towards something. Lisbon was that moment for me. The next day, a text from my daughter-in-law appeared on my phone. Not a call, not a question, just 3 words. "Are you okay?" I stared at it. The clouds moved. I didn't reply. Instead, I put on my shoes, tied my scarf, and went to listen to the ocean, a language older than families, older than guilt. On a cliff outside the city, waves clawed at the rocks, and the wind pushed at my coat like a friend who didn't care about personal space. I closed my eyes and let it all wash over me, the grief, the leaving, the sudden abundance of color. "I'm still here," I whispered, not to the sea but to the part of myself that had been waiting. It answered by letting me breathe deeply, fully, without apology. There are people you meet who mark you not because they belong in your life forever, but because they remind you that your life is not over. Lisbon gave me one such person. It was my 4th morning in the city, and I'd spent most of it wandering through Feira de Ladra, the flea market, running my fingers across old typewriters, chipped porcelain, and the kind of jewelry that still smelled vaguely like perfume in decades. That's where I saw him. A man who must have been in his mid-60s, with hair like salt scattered unevenly through storm clouds, and a posture that suggested a long career of both endurance and curiosity. He was leaning over a table of used books, one hand tucked behind his back, the other lifting a book out of a stack. The cover was faded burgundy. He turned it over gently, as if the story inside could still be warm. I don't know why I noticed him. Maybe it was the gentleness. Men at that age aren't often given permission to touch the world softly. He did. I paused, not meaning to stare, but not quite able to walk away either, and that's when he looked up. Not at me, but for me. Deliberate, steady eye contact, the kind that doesn't assume anything, but doesn't doubt the moment either. "Beautiful morning," he said in English, but with an accent I couldn't place. "It is," I replied, "the kind that fools you into thinking time is generous." He smiled, just barely. "Time is generous," he said. "We just spend the first half of our lives spending it like we have more." There was no flirtation, no charm offensive, just a statement delivered like a soft truth dropped between two strangers who happened to meet under the same sky. We ended up walking together through the market. His name was Adrian. He was a retired geography professor from England, traveling slowly through Europe, not searching for anything, just continuing a habit of learning by moving. He spoke about places the way people speak about people they've loved, affectionately, without ownership. He said the world changes, but much more slowly than we do. He said the earth forgives us our foolishness, eventually. At a small cafe on a winding street, we sat down for coffee. He ordered black. I asked for mine with milk. He didn't try to guess my habits, and I didn't try to explain them. "You're traveling alone?" he asked after a pause. "Yes," I said, "but not lonely." He nodded. "Good." Too many people confuse solitude with emptiness. We talked for an hour, then 2. I told him about my house, my garden, the plants that bloomed no matter who cared for them. I didn't mention the family right away. He didn't ask. Eventually, I said simply, I left because I was tired of being features in someone else's story. He sat back, took that in like a professor listening to a student share a hard-earned insight. "Ah," he said, "and you're writing yourself back in as the main character." "I'm trying. That's all stories really ask." When we got up to leave, he didn't ask for my phone number. He didn't promise fate or future. He simply tipped his head slightly and said, "Enjoy whatever comes next. You look like someone ready for it," and then he left. No exchange of details, no photograph taken to remember the moment, just a brief, clear, human connection, the kind that happens when no one is trying to label it. I walked back to the guest house with a small smile that wasn't for anyone else to see. That night, I sat on the balcony and wrote in my notebook. Today, someone looked at me like I still existed. That's what Lisbon gave me. Not romance, not rescue, but recognition. The next morning, my phone buzzed with another message from home. This time it was my son. "Mom, we're worried. Just let us know you're okay." I read it. I didn't delete it. But I didn't answer. Instead, I packed. The world was large, and I had more names to be called than the one they used sparingly. "I am," I told her, "not new. Just ask more." She nodded. "Ah, welcome back to yourself." There's a moment when you realize that you're no longer walking to escape something. You're walking toward something. Lisbon was that moment for me. The next day, a text from my daughter-in-law appeared on my phone. Not a call, not a question, just 3 words. "Are you okay?" I stared at it. The clouds moved. I didn't reply. Instead, I put on my shoes, tied my scarf, and went to listen to the ocean, a language older than families, older than guilt. On a cliff outside the city, waves clawed at the rocks, and the wind pushed at my coat like a friend who didn't care about personal space. I closed my eyes and let it all wash over me, the grief, the leaving, the sudden abundance of color. "I'm still here," I whispered, not to the sea, but to the part of myself that had been waiting. It answered by letting me breathe deeply, fully, without apology. Fear doesn't announce itself with sirens. It creeps in quietly, like a visitor who doesn't knock, just slips inside and makes itself comfortable. For years, mine lived in the corners of my house, disguised as good manners. It wore the scent of patience and the soft smile of, "Whatever you prefer, dear." But in Lisbon one afternoon, I realized it had finally gone quiet. It started with a sound, not grand, not cosmic, just the deep hum of a guitar from somewhere down the street. I was sitting at a cafe tracing the rim of my cup when the notes reached me, low, deliberate, ancient. It was Fado again, that music of longing. But this time, it didn't sound sad. It sounded alive, as if sorrow, when sung honestly, could turn itself into courage. Without thinking, I stood up and followed it. The cafe door swung shut behind me, and I walked through narrow streets that felt like veins, pulsing with voices, smells, footsteps. The music led me to a small tavern near the river, tucked between 2 shops that sold postcards and regret. Inside, the air was thick with heat and something sweeter, anticipation maybe. The singer was an older woman, not much younger than me, hair coiled tight, eyes fierce. When she opened her mouth, the room stilled. It wasn't beauty that stopped us, it was truth. She sang about leaving, about watching people go, about the small dignity in not begging to be followed. I didn't know the words, but I didn't need to. Her voice did what good truths always do. It found the hollow spaces and filled them. Halfway through the song, she caught my eye. It wasn't staged or sentimental, it was recognition. She saw in me the same ache, the same defiance disguised as composure. I felt something tighten in my throat. Not pain, not joy, just the realization that I'd been surviving when I should have been living. When the song ended, the applause was hesitant at first, then full. I found myself clapping harder than I meant to. She smiled, a small, knowing thing, and nodded once before turning away. I walked back to the guest house in silence. The air was still warm, the stones still holding the day's heat. My companion was sitting by the window, reading again. "You were gone long," she said. "I found a song," I answered. She smiled, but her eyes were on the book. "And did it find you back?" "Yes," I said softly. "I think it did." That night, I couldn't sleep. My heart wasn't restless, it was awake. I lay there thinking about all the years I'd given to waiting, waiting for permission, waiting for company, waiting for the right time. And suddenly, I couldn't think of a single good reason to keep waiting for anything. The next morning, I told her I was going out alone. She didn't question it, just handed me her scarf and said, "It's windy." Bring yourself back in one piece, I walked to the ocean. the wide open kind that doesn't care what name you give it. The wind tore through my hair. My coat flapped like a flag for no one in particular. I stood there until the tide crept over my shoes, and then, with no music, no audience, no plan, I began to move. Not gracefully, not carefully, just freely. My feet sank into the wet sand, my arms loose at my sides. The rhythm wasn't mine to find. It was already there. It always had been. I'd just forgotten to listen. A woman walking her dog stopped a few meters away. She smiled, not mockingly, not with pity, just that small, tender smile women reserve for other women who've remembered themselves. When I stopped, breathless and ridiculous, I laughed, out loud. The sound startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard it. Fear didn't leave me dramatically that day. It didn't vanish in applause or fireworks. It just unclenched, slowly, quietly. And in its place, something simple settled in. A pulse, steady and sure. I wasn't brave yet, but I was done being afraid of wanting more. That evening, I bought a small yellow scarf from a street vendor, bright as marigolds, almost defiant in its cheer. When I wrapped it around my neck, I caught my reflection in a shop window. For the first time in years, I didn't look like someone's mother or someone's afterthought. I looked like someone about to become her own story. I am, I told her, not new, just more. She nodded. Ah. Welcome back to yourself. There's a moment when you realize that you're no longer walking to escape something. You're walking toward something. Lisbon was that moment for me. The next day, a text from my daughter-in-law appeared on my phone. Not a call, not a question, just 3 words. Are you okay? I stared at it. The clouds moved. I didn't reply. Instead, I put on my shoes, tied my scarf, and went to listen to the ocean, a language older than families, older than guilt. On a cliff outside the city, waves clawed at the rocks, and the wind pushed at my coat like a friend who didn't care about personal space. I closed my eyes and let it all wash over me, the grief, the leaving, the sudden abundance of color. I'm still here, I whispered, not to the sea, but to the part of myself that had been waiting. It answered by letting me breathe deeply, fully, without apology. It arrived 2 days later. The letter slipped under my door at sunrise like an apology that didn't want to make eye contact. I found it on the floor, folded into thirds, no envelope, just my name scrawled across it in a handwriting I recognized immediately, my son's. The script looked rushed, not elegant, jagged in a way that told me the pen had been held too tightly. I made tea, sat at the little desk by the window, and read it slowly, like something that had the power to bruise. Mom, we don't understand what you're doing. The kids are worried. Amelia asked if you're mad at us. Laura thinks you're trying to prove a point. I don't know what to think. We went to your house and everything looked fine, but it scared us more, like you just left. If this is about the trip, I'm sorry. We didn't mean to leave you out. It was just hard to plan all at once, and we thought you wouldn't want the hassle of travel. Maybe we were wrong. If we were, I'm sorry, but please call. We're your family. We love you. Come home. We can fix this. David. I read it twice, then a third time, not searching for hidden meaning, just letting the words sit in my chest like something both heavy and hollow. They were scared. They thought I'd vanished. They were guilty, maybe, or confused. But there was no understanding in the letter, no acknowledgement of years of quiet dismissal, of absence that had gone unnoticed until it became an inconvenience. They wanted reassurance, they wanted answers, they wanted me to come home. What they didn't want, not yet, was to listen. I folded the letter and placed it on the edge of the desk beside my teacup. My hands were steady. I didn't feel anger, just a kind of clean-scrubbed sadness, the kind that doesn't weep but knows exactly how it got there. My companion entered the room then, tying her scarf as she walked. She glanced at the paper beside me and raised a brow. "News?" "Yes," I said. "Bad?" "Not exactly." She nodded, the way only someone over 60 knows how, understanding that sometimes the wound isn't fresh, just finely visible. We went out for a walk. The streets were quiet, not asleep, just gathering themselves for the day. The city smelled of coffee and river mist. We found a bench by the water, and for a long time neither of us spoke. "You're not going back yet," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. "Do you want to?" "I want them to know me," I said, "but I want to know me first." She patted the bench twice. "Then I suggest we move. Stillness is for roots. You don't seem in the mood to settle yet." She was right. Lisbon had stirred something in me, but it hadn't answered everything. There were still parts of me lost under years of duty and routine, and I wasn't going to find them sitting still. We returned to the guest house that afternoon, and I did something that surprised even me. I opened my phone and checked train schedules. Then I laid my finger on a place I'd never been but had always wanted to see. Granada. A city made of sun and shadows, of music and old stone that remember who you used to be, even if you don't. That night, back in my room, I took up my notebook and wrote. They asked me to come back. I'm not ready to return, but I'm ready to go forward. I closed the cover, tied it with its ribbon, and placed it in my bag. I looked out the window at the hills, the roofs, the soft gold of the sunset, and whispered to the air that didn't need permission to move. I am not lost. I am becoming. Granada greeted us with heat like velvet, dense, textured, warm without apology. By then, my feet had traveled enough cities to know the places that change you are rarely the loudest. They're the ones that sit with you in your quiet moments and say, I know who you are, even if you forgot. We checked into a small inn with a courtyard full of orange trees, their branches heavy and fragrant, drooping like old men with full stories. The air buzzed with cicadas, persistent, rhythmic, like castanets played by invisible hands. The room was humble, 2 twin beds, arched windows, and a single clay vase with a sprig of rosemary in it. But the view... Ah! The Alhambra rose in the distance, weightless yet rooted, the way dust holds light in a beam. I woke early the next day, sunlight brushing the wall like a painter testing colors. My companion was still sleeping. Even her dreams seemed to wander slowly, so I left her a note and ventured uphill. The climb to the Alhambra wasn't easy. My knees told me so, but I took it slowly, pausing not from exhaustion, but reverence. Old cities know when you're listening. As I walked through the palace gardens, stone paths leading me like lines of poetry I didn't yet understand, I noticed a kind of stillness. Not silence, stillness. The kind that asks nothing, expects nothing, but holds space for whatever you decide to bring. That's when I heard it, a faint humming. No melody I recognized, but something raw and soft. A woman stood nearby, also alone, eyes closed, fingertips brushing the ancient wall like reading the braille of time. She opened her eyes and met mine, smiling without surprise. "Do you speak Spanish?" she asked. "No," I said. "Good," she laughed. "Then we can talk without pretending to say something impressive." We walked together, 2 strangers with unwritten names. She told me she had visited the Alhambra every April for 15 years, said it was her place to remember who she'd been before the world tried to edit her. I like that, I nodded. The world does try to edit. She stopped, turned to me. Did you let it? The question caught me by the throat. I did, I said honestly, but I'm rewriting. Good, she said. There are worse things than being late to your own story. One of them is not showing up at all. Later, back in my room, I found a voice memo from my granddaughter, Amelia. Her voice, breathy, hesitant, floated out. "Hi, Grandma. Mom told me you're traveling. I saw some photos and, I don't know, you look different. Not like older, just more alive. Anyway, I just wanted to say I hope you're okay. I miss you. I wish I'd asked you more things before, like what your life felt like before you were just mine. I love you." I played it twice. The second time, I let the words sink into the quiet parts of me, the ones that still felt 5 years old and full of unexpressed longing. When dusk settled like a soft shawl over the city, I sat on the terrace and recorded my own message, voice steady. "Sweetheart, thank you. I'm more okay than I've been in a very long time. I'm learning that being lonely and being alone are not the same thing. I miss you too, and I promise I'll come home one day, but not to the same story. I'll be bringing a new version of me with me, one that you deserve to know." I hesitated, then added softly, "Tell your father I'm fine, but tell him with silence, not explanation. Sometimes silence is the voice someone needs to hear." I hit send, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of my own voice. Not loud, not angry, just real, fully mine. The next morning, as the sun poured itself onto the tiled roofs, my companion and I decided it was time to move again. "Where to?" she asked, gathering her scarf. "Seville," I said. "I want to hear flamenco up close." She laughed. "You want to feel fire." "Yes," I smiled. "I think I've earned a little flame." Seville wasn't just a city, it was a pulse. The air was thick with the smell of oranges and heat, alive in a way that demanded presence. You don't stroll through Seville, you enter it like a dance you didn't know you were part of until your feet learn the steps on their own. My companion and I arrived at midday. The streets shimmered, white stone reflecting sunlight like a mirror, asking you to look at yourself clearly, without flattery. Even the shadows had edges. We checked into a small hotel on a narrow street where the windows were shaded by wrought iron balconies, and the walls bore century-old secrets in the form of fading murals. My room had a small courtyard view, potted plants, a lone red chair, and the sound of someone watering geraniums with devotion. That evening, as dusk cooled the fire in the sky, we found a flamenco bar tucked into an alley no bigger than a heartbeat. No tourists queued outside, just a handful of people scattered at old tables, faces unto themselves. The stage was tiny, a raised wooden platform, scuffed and scarred, like it had held generations of feet that refused to apologize. There were no microphones, no colored lights, just truth. The woman who took the stage couldn't have been younger than 75, skin creased, eyes blazing with a grief so honest it became power. She wore red, not the shade of seduction, but of survival. When she lifted her arms, it wasn't to invite applause, it was to claim space. And when she began to dance, my God, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't graceful, it was real. Every stomp, every turn, every slow curve of a wrist said, "I am still here. You don't get to decide when I'm finished." Her body didn't move to impress, it moved to testify. My heart tightened. Not in envy, not in awe alone, but in recognition. I'd spent so many years shrinking to fit spaces that were spacious only for others. Watching her, I felt something reoccupy my bones. When the dance ended, the room didn't explode in applause, it exhaled. Later, we took the long way back to the hotel. No reason, just feeling. Halfway home, my phone buzzed. A text. From David, just one line. "Mom, I'm trying to understand. And I miss you 7 small words." And suddenly, I felt it. Not the old tug of obligation, not guilt or hurt. But space. Space for something new. Space for choice. I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, out of truth. I wanted to respond from a place that wasn't built with guilt bricks. Back at the hotel, I took the scarf I'd bought in Lisbon, the yellow one that made me feel like summer, and tied it around my hair, even though there was no occasion. I went to the courtyard and danced, not with precision, not with grace, just with breath, with the wind, with the version of myself I had finally claimed. At one point, my companion walked out and stood at the doorway, watching. She didn't interrupt, didn't joke, just smiled softly. When I sat down, flushed and alive, she handed me water. "No turning back after a moment like that," she said. "I don't plan to," I replied. The next morning, we packed. Seville had done what it needed to do. It had lit a match, and I knew then it wasn't just a journey anymore. It was a homecoming I'd carry inside me. Before leaving, I wrote in my notebook, "Returning home isn't about crossing a threshold. It's about arriving as the person who stepped beyond it." The airport in Barcelona felt like every airport I'd ever passed through. All polished floors and quiet echoes, a place built for transitions, not goodbyes. I didn't cry when the train from Seville pulled in that morning. I didn't feel heavy. I didn't feel like I was closing a chapter. I felt ready. Not for the end, but for the continuation of something I finally recognized as my own life. We didn't say goodbye, my companion and I. There was no grand farewell, no dramatic hug, just a small, certain touch of our palms before she stepped onto her platform and I onto mine. "Send me postcards from the future," she said. "I'll send you silence from the past," I replied. Our laughter floated like ribbon and then fell with grace. On the flight home, I packed no expectations into the space where nerves and anticipation often live. No one was picking me up. No one was waiting at the gate with wrapped arms and watery eyes, and that was okay. Some arrivals are meant to be met by yourself. My house looked exactly the same. The plants were alive. The blinds were, as I'd left them, slightly pulled open, as if the rooms had been looking out all this time, curious but unbothered by my absence. I set my suitcase down and inhaled the familiar scent of oak and lemon polish, and for a brief moment I stood in my own silence and liked the company. A soft knock broke it. I took a slow breath, walked to the door, and opened it. Amelia stood there. She didn't rush in, didn't spill apologies or questions. She just looked at me, really looked, not at a position or a title or the empty seat I used to fill at their table, but at me, the person. "Hey, Grandma," she said, voice a little shaky. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied. She held up a sketchbook and flipped it open. A charcoal drawing of me, standing in the marketplace in Lisbon, wearing my yellow scarf, hand shading my eyes, looking toward something unseen. "She looks like she remembered who she was," it read on the bottom. My throat tightened, not from sadness, not from guilt, from recognition. "I framed it," she said casually, "for you, so you don't forget again." Behind her, down the porch steps, I saw them, David and Laura, not creeping, not barging, just waiting. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving, not drowning. "Are you ready?" Amelia asked quietly. "For what?" I replied. "To be heard," she said. Her voice, soft but sure, melted the weight I'd carried for years. The one of being someone's afterthought, someone's caretaker, someone's responsibility, but not their story. I nodded. She took my hand and led me down the steps. David and Laura didn't say anything at first. They just let me approach. That alone told me something had shifted. David stepped forward, clearing his throat in a way that meant he felt more than his words dared reach. "I want to do better," he said simply. "No justifications, no, but you have to understand, we want you to be part of the family, not just present, really in it, if you still want to." His voice cracked a little. That was new, that was honest. I didn't hug him, not right away. I let the silence sit like sunlight between us. Not cold, not heavy, just real. "I'll think about it," I said. He nodded, like a man who knew the value of patience for the first time. Before they left, Laura handed me a box. "For your travels," she said gently. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, blank pages inviting stories. "Write them," she said. "We're ready to read." I closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled deeply. This was not a movie ending. This was a beginning, tender, unhurried, on my terms. I walked into my living room, picked up Paul's photo from the mantel, and smiled, not with grief, with gratitude. He would have loved this version of me, the one who danced, the one who said no, the one who booked tickets and didn't ask for permission. I sat on the porch, notebook in hand, pen ready. On the first page I wrote, I was never too old, I was simply never finished, and I wasn't. I still am not. There are trains I haven't ridden, songs I haven't heard, rooms I will one day walk into like I own them. The world felt just big enough again, and I, Mrs. Rose Harper, finally felt just right in it.